Awesome. Thank you so much, teams. Fantastic. So next up, I'm very excited to introduce Heather Dewey Hagborg. She is a transdisciplinary artist and educator who is interested in art as research and critical practice. Her work has been shown internationally at events and venues, including the World Economic Forum, Shenzhen Urbanism and Architectural Biennial, the New Museum, the Centre Pompidou, and PS1 MoMA. Heather has a PhD in electronic arts from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, a master's degree from the International Telecommunications Program at NYU, and a BA in Informational Arts from Bennington College. She is currently an assistant professor of art and technology studies at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and a 2016 Creative Capital Award grantee in the area of emerging fields. Welcome, Heather.
In 2015, I received this email. Paper Magazine contacted me to ask if I would create a DNA portrait of Chelsea Manning. Chelsea was incarcerated for the information that she made public, among many other things, showing the prevalence of torture and civilian deaths in the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Due to a harsh policy on visitation, she couldn't be visited or photographed, and her image had been suppressed since her sentencing and gender transition in 2013. I realized that by interpreting her DNA, I could give her back a kind of public face, a humanity that she'd been denied for years. So how did I end up here, creating this DNA portrait of Chelsea Manning? It all started in 2012 when I was sitting in therapy, and I was staring at this print across from me on the wall, hovering above the therapeutic couch. And I noticed that the glass covering this print was cracked, and I saw this hair stuck in the crack of the glass. And I sat there for the hour looking at this hair and thinking about who might have left it, relating to this person, imagining a person with long dark hair sitting on the couch, leaning back and getting it caught in that crack. And I started picturing who they might be and wondering what they might be like. And when I left, I couldn't help noticing things like this all around me. So hair and cigarette butts, chewing gum on the sidewalk, subway benches, saliva left on the rim of coffee cups. I realized that we were essentially leaving evidence everywhere, and that this kind of messiness of the human body, the very stuff that was making us human, was becoming a liability in this new era, and that we were leaving artifacts which anyone could come along and mine for information. And so that's exactly what I did. In Stranger Visions, I obsessively collected those hairs, those bits of chewed up gum and cigarette butts from the streets and public bathrooms and waiting rooms of New York City. I extracted DNA from them in the community biolab GenSpace, and then I analyzed it to generate 3D printed, full-color, life-size portraits representing what those individuals might look like based on genomic research. So to do this, I looked at traits that were fairly well established, like eye color, and I looked at contentious loci that are correlated with ancestry, where the production of genomic knowledge about populations is fairly disputed. I looked at genes that are not often considered controversial, but which I think demand further analysis, like genetic sex. And I looked at speculative science, so areas where the science was just beginning to come out, so things like weight and freckling and facial shape. And so I took this genetic profile that I created and I fed it into software that I wrote, which would parameterize a 3D model of a face based on these different kinds of characteristics. And what I would do is generate about 5 different versions or so of a person and then choose the one that I thought was the most artistically compelling, totally subjectively. And then I would output that as a 3D model, send that to the 3D printer, and then print that in full color at life size. And so what I was doing was drawing on both established and speculative science, research to forecast where this technology called DNA phenotyping, this urge to create an image of a person from DNA, forecast where that was going and to call attention to new vulnerabilities of surveillance, but then also to call attention to this impulse to genetic determinism, so this all too common tendency to want to reduce the complexity of the human to the execution of genetic code, as if all we need to do is decipher that code and there we'll find ourselves and our futures written. So the first sculpture that I produced using this method was a self-portrait. And people always ask me about the accuracy of this technology as the first question. So on the one hand, you're welcome to look at the portrait and look at me and make up your own mind. But the truth is that the accuracy of these kinds of technologies is very subjective and varies a lot case by case. So how much do I look like a woman of Northern European ancestry with blue eyes, less tendency to be overweight, and some freckles? And really, what is meant by looking like? It's one thing to see two faces side by side and sort of think about the similarities and differences, and it's totally another thing to pull someone out of a crowd. How many people in this room could fit the same profile as me? So the project was intentionally very controversial. Stranger Visions enacts what I think of as a problematic practice to make that very practice visible. So it was clear to me that this DNA phenotyping research was happening behind closed laboratory doors, and I hoped that by doing it very publicly, I wanted to demonstrate that this future was just around the corner and that we should start debating that now. And really, that's been the most interesting part of the project for me, that it's broken out of the art context, that it infiltrated mass media and social media and brought me into all of these really interesting places that I never thought I would have access to, like public policy meetings around genetic privacy, for example. And so I discovered sort of inadvertently, I mean, without intending it when I started the project, discovered that art and design had this kind of amazing potential for making a very real public impact. Then, late in 2014, a company called Parabon Nanolabs launched a new service they called DNA Snapshot to police departments around the United States. So I had expected this in 5 years, but this was just too soon. I'd spent all of this time researching the science, and I knew that it wasn't ready. After all, I'd just been there, generating 5, 6, 10 different versions of a person's face and choosing the one I thought was artistically compelling. What would the police's criteria be? And so I've become increasingly concerned, and continue to be concerned, that in the hands of police, pursuing criminal investigations in particular, this kind of technology becomes essentially a new form of racial profiling that appears to have the authority of DNA, that appears to have this kind of scientific basis behind it. So back to Chelsea. When I received the invitation to work on her portrait, I was thinking about all of these things. It was really just after this company had launched. And I was excited about the opportunity for two reasons, kind of beyond the obvious first one of just completely admiring her and being so flattered and excited to work with someone that I admired and to kind of get to know them through their DNA. But beyond that, also, I was excited for the opportunity to try to show the reductionism of this technology. So to show how it reduces the complexity of gender identity to this kind of genetic sex profile, and how it also presents a kind of stereotyped idea of what a gendered face is supposed to look like. And then second, that due to this harsh policy on visitation that I mentioned, that Chelsea had really been made invisible. And so I saw this potential for this technology, which is really complex and problematic, also to have this kind of amazing ability to give her this public face that she'd been stripped of, to give her this visibility that she'd been denied. So the next time Chelsea was getting her hair cut, she swept up some of the clippings and then took Q-tips and swabbed the insides of her cheeks and mailed them to me out of the prison. I extracted DNA and sent it for sequencing and essentially went through the same process that I went through with Stranger Visions, but with one crucial difference, which is that I decided not to profile her genetic sex. Chelsea was worried about appearing too masculine, and I thought that this really became the perfect opportunity to do a first kind of experiment at showing this reductionism of the technology, so showing this reliance on stereotyped ideas about faces. And so what I did is generate 2 different versions of Chelsea to represent her, so 2 variations. So the one you see on your left, is gender neutral. So this is with the algorithmic sex parameter left at 0. And then the one on the right is female, algorithmically female, which is how she self-identifies. So these virtual portraits were printed alongside the interview in Paper Magazine. And then these are the 2 3D printed versions of this, which premiered at the World Economic Forum in January of 2016, ironically giving her this public face and this presence at one of the most elite and inaccessible events of the year. But the story doesn't end there. So in November of 2016, as Obama was preparing to leave office, it was clear, I think, to many of us who'd been thinking about Chelsea, that her chances for clemency were quickly diminishing. And so I wanted to work on something to assist with her clemency campaign. And I happened to be doing a residency at the time at a company called ThoughtWorks. And I'd just given an artist talk, and a woman who worked there, Shirley Kanungo, approached me and was really excited about my talk, and she wanted to work with me, and it turned out she was also an illustrator. And so then it just kind of came together that maybe Shirley and Chelsea and I could all work on a short graphic story together. And so this came together very quickly and sort of across all odds. I mean, Chelsea in prison, Shirley in India, me in New York City, and in 2 months we pulled together this comic book, which narrates the story of our collaboration, the story of radical love, the portraits I generated of Chelsea, and then also ends with a speculative twist, which hopefully you can read here. So on the last page of the comic, we envision that Obama commutes Chelsea's sentence and that she's released and is able to come and visit an exhibition of her portraits in person. And so we published this comic early on the morning of Tuesday, January 17th, and that afternoon, Obama commuted Chelsea's sentence. And as you probably know, last month on May 17th, she walked free. So needless to say, after working with her for a year and a half, I was completely overjoyed and so proud to have played even the smallest part in kind of incanting this future that we really wanted to see. And the kind of latest update on this is that this speculative exhibition will indeed take place. And so opening August 2nd, if you're local to New York, please come. I'll have an exhibition of Chelsea's portraits, these original portraits, but this kind of expanded, exploded version of it that will contain 30 different possible Chelseas that could be derived from her DNA, a whole kind of diverse crowd or mass movement of Chelseas occupying the gallery space. And so that will be opening August 2nd at Friedman Gallery in Soho. Okay, so let's take a step back here. So here we are at the Biodesign Challenge. You've been tasked with envisioning future applications of biotechnology, and we're incubating in this brand new field that's bursting with promise, right? Lives will be saved, diseases will be cured, the environment will be healed. So why does this feel so familiar, and why does this feel so false? For one thing, it could be because many of the companies that promise us these bright, shiny futures are exactly the same ones that wreaked such havoc in the first place. Continuously merging into ever larger super entities, do we really want the Dow DuPonts and Bayer Monsantos of this world shaping what bioinnovation looks like? Haven't they done enough? Beyond this, we've also so recently seen the total demise of digital and cyber utopianism, as the dream of the internet gave way to a system of total surveillance and commodification of our every move. And machine learning systems pop up all around us, silently embodying the biases and discrimination of their all-too-human creators. So why should biotech be any different? In fact, why shouldn't biotech be so much worse when the stakes are so much higher and when life itself is the medium? Yeah, so biotechnology is not going to save the world. More likely than not, it will reap great harm. And if we don't actively work to change the status quo, To grow awareness of the power dynamics of biotechnology, things will stay the course. The powerful will remain in power, the rich will remain rich, the poor will remain poor, the environment will deteriorate and actively be destroyed. Structural discrimination and stereotypes will be embedded in our shiny new biotech, all recapitulating the politics and structural oppression of existing systems in industry, technology, and education. I really don't think I need to describe the dystopia for you. I think you already know all of the stories about designer babies, CRISPR gene-driven organisms running haywire, mass genetic surveillance, bioterrorism, secret government bioweapon deployment. It's a bleak scene. However, I really genuinely believe that all of us together have the power to give the emerging biotech future a different shape. One that is just, humane, ethical, environmentally sound, and even compassionate. I think if all 200 of us in this room really make a commitment as aspiring or established designers, artists, scholars, technologists, scientists, technologists, to actively make our work progressive and socially impactful, we can circumvent this dystopia and maybe even fumble towards something decent. So what might a biotech future that isn't so dark look like? I've been taking a stab at thinking about this question of utopia and dystopia, but maybe something in the middle, right? Maybe it doesn't quite have to be a utopia yet, but it's enough to try to speculate about this kind of broader social future that is at least not dystopic. What might that look like? And so I've been developing a bit of a speculative fictional scenario that I'll share a kind of first run draft of with you now. So, after the last patent battle and the bursting of the CRISPR bubble in 2015, it is decided that all innovations discovered using public funds are public knowledge and must be totally open source and intellectual property free. A network of biohubs are developed across the globe, critically engaged in diverse communities that bring together scientists, engineers, ecologists, artists, policy experts, designers, and scholars, all of whom make a living wage. Together, their work involves not only discovery, design, and testing, but also historical, social, and environmental impact research, as well as the development of guidelines for ethical deployment of everything they produce. The global bio network shares not only information and resources, but also the responsibility for vetting each other's work. Expensive academic journals give way to peer-to-peer assessment. Community-evaluated studies are available open to all online, each experiment carefully documented in detail by automated instruments and video recording. Biohubs are also community centers, actively engaged with the ecology and health of the local vicinity, testing and maintaining records of key factors like pollution levels and microbial diversity. When the latest epidemic breaks out, the biohub provides real-time genome sequencing and customized vaccine production. The biohub is a social and pedagogical space of lectures, workshops, and casual discussions, as well as a site of community governance. Local biopolicy is decided by consensus there. The new system of free-flowing ideas between academia, industry, community labs, and hobbyist experimenters leads to the distributed development and testing of WOEMS, W-O-E-M-S, the Whole Organism Emergent Mutation System. It works by first simulating the impact of millions of tiny parallel mutations across the genome, epigenome, and microbiome of a given organism. Building on rapid advances in machine learning that come after the reorganization of education, more than 10 billion virtual organisms can be tested a second, leading to the generation in just minutes of top candidates for wet testing. After synthesis, whole genomes are implanted in protocells to develop entirely new organisms from scratch, while a similar approach called coaxing is taken to refiguring already living creatures. Instead of targeting specific genes, the whole genome, epigenome, and microbiome of the target is gently nudged toward a synthetic model through a series of gradually induced mutations. And biodeterminism gives way to bioagency. The WOEMS system is cheap, and easy to use. We can all make our own organisms, manipulate our own bodies, and see how incredibly messy and complex that really is. The more we discover, the more apparent the limits of our knowledge become. Ideas of biological race and sex fade away as new experiments allow for a continuous spectrum of previously unimagined phenotypic expressions. Our physical bodies become mutable, but somewhat unpredictable. We never know exactly what the outcome of WOMS will be. So this story is obviously my fantasy, and not even really a science fiction. I mean, full of holes and contradictions, obviously lacking a narrative also. But the point is that we desperately need new visions to aspire to and to inspire us. And not just visions about technologies, we need visions of societies. We need visions about what we want. We need things to work towards. It's not just about coming up with some shiny new technology and saying this is going to save us. It's about picturing what is the world that we actually want to live in? What might that look like? And then what are the things that may or may not help us get there, that may or may not be there as we go along the way. So all of this is to say that, well, it's so easy right now for us to throw up our hands and to feel totally overwhelmed and powerless with the whole situation that we're in. This is exactly the moment for us to get to work. And here we are all together, all 200 of us, so what better time to get started? Thank you.